Hi, everybody. I'm here with Lauren Friedman again, and we're talking about recruiter enablement, but specifically, we're talking today about interviewing and hiring managers and some of the things that we really need to know about in talent acquisition. So, Lauren, you've been on a few times, but just in case anybody hasn't met you before, give us a quick intro to you.
Yes, so it's the hat trick now. I am the owner and operator of Workforce Consulting. We are an end-to-end employee performance improvement methodology, I guess we would call it. It really is how do we modernize to help startups beat these employee hurdles that cause most of them to fail. My goal with this company is to get as many startups through those early stages of seed, A, and B through those easy pitfalls that we've seen so many companies fall into when it comes to their employees, whether it's hiring, retainment, performance. There's so many levers we can pull. And so I focus on the systems and methodologies that just work and are scalable and fit into this lean and fast environment that every startup needs to operate within. And I'm super excited to continue our last conversation. We covered some of the ways that hiring managers need to modernize not just their mindset, but also how are they working with their recruiters, right? We talked about getting the recruiters in the room with the hiring managers earlier, having actual sit down meetings to do kickoffs early in the process. And thank you for having me back now to talk about what do hiring managers do with their interviewers, which is that last, well, one of the final pieces of the puzzles. Um, so yeah, let me know, where should we start?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to start with just briefly is as you were doing your introduction today, I was thinking that, startups and scale-up companies, they often don't have nearly enough recruiters for all of the
Mhm.
jobs that need to get filled. And I think they also do tend to lean on hiring managers to do more of their own recruitment than maybe a large corporate does. Is
A
this what
hundred
you've?
percent.
Yes. Okay. Tell me
Yeah,
your
so
comments on that.
so in those super early stages, right, when you're 10, 20 people as a very early company, yes, everyone is on board. Typically, what we see is actually the founder of the company or the COO ends up leading a lot of the hiring still with that. So even in that super early situation, unless you have a hiring manager who's been experienced before and is brought in specifically with that scaling in mind, most of those early employees are not brought in for hiring skills. Their network might be an added bonus, but really they're brought in for their technical expertise. So even in this early stage where hiring is the most important, it tends to be an ancillary skill set that is not looked for. It sort of is lucked upon. It's lucky if someone comes in with that. So one of the missions of my company really has been even the playing field. There are baseline skills, and we'll talk about what are some of these baseline skills in the next episode that we're doing together, we just said. But hiring as a skill is one that needs to be learned, especially in hiring managers. Like we talked about in our last segment, we're seeing so many teams now, even at a larger size, even when recruiters have been put into the organization and hiring has shifted off of the plates of, the individual contributors, we're operating with less. We used to have 60 recruiters to fill 200 roles. Now we've got 15. We still have 200 roles to fill. So how do we make up that difference is what we started talking about with the hiring managers. And they are that linchpin. They are that quarterback, that MVP of the hiring field. So how do we get them to peak performance?
Absolutely. Okay. And enablement is really important in this.
Mhm.
So, okay, let's talk about hiring managers and interviewing. What are the most important things we need to know?
Communicate with each other. This is the one thing that in the research and all of the companies that I've supported as a consultant or directly as a recruiter, it is laughable how little preparation is given to the interviewers from the hiring manager, who, like we talked about last time, they are the source of truth for what we need in this role. And what we see happening, because this preparation and communication step before the on-sites is skipped. We have interviewers going into roles or going into these interviews with no idea of what the role actually needs. So they're bringing in their own assumptions and their personal thoughts of what would I want in a colleague? What do I think this role needs? And any biases that they may have that the team isn't aware of, best schools, best programming languages, best sales methodologies, best tools used, whatever it may be that people can come in with biases. Even for myself as a recruiter, I've got a preference on which applicant tracking system my hires come in using, right? So when we don't have the hiring manager even simply sending a preparation email out to the team saying, hey team, we've got interviews coming up. Here's what we're interviewing for. You would not believe how many interviewers I've talked to that say, I go into the interview, it pops up on my calendar, usually the day before, sometimes same day. I walk in the room and in that moment, I'm realizing, looking at the resume for the first time and looking at the title of the meeting to see what role I'm interviewing the candidate for. That is a broken system right there. So that is what a lot of the foundational changes that we can start making is around that prep step. And there's more I can say to that, but I'll turn it back to you for real quick.
So I think that I'd like to understand a bit more about like how do we how do we how do we prepare? I'm not a big expert on assessment at all or on interviewing at all. So what are the best ways for us to go about preparing hiring managers so they know what they can do, what they need to do?
Yes. So we talked about how the hiring manager and the recruiter can partner together when they're creating the job description so that they can outline what does this role actually need, not what Google has hired for or what our competitor has hired for, but what does our company need? Take a note of that conversation. Send that in an email ahead of time, or better yet, have a quick 10-minute, Zoom, Slack, however, get together so that the hiring manager can open a space for interviewers to ask questions, to challenge even the hiring manager's assumptions. Because the role of the interviewers at that final stage is actually to be the deepest technical expert in their field of assessment. So if you aren't telling your interviewers, what do I want you assessing? If you have a person like me going into a room, I would consider myself a recruiting expert, but I'm also a go-to-market expert. So who knows which skill set I'm going to choose to assess that person on, unless I'm told specifically, Lauren, for this interview, you are focusing on the go-to-market and your colleague is going to focus on recruiting. That way, me as the interviewer, I have a clear directive of, even if I'm not provided specifically questions to ask, which is another hint that I will give to hiring managers and recruiters, think of some behavioral questions that you can give to your interviewers so that you can have 100% repetition and consistency in the flow of that interview while still keeping it very natural. Interviewers are not going to go in being experts on what to ask. If you give them a focus area, if you say, here's where we need you to stay in these boundaries, that will also create a better candidate experience. Can't tell you how many candidates I've talked to, friends that I've talked to that say, I went into a final interview and I was asked the same question 3 times across 3 interviews. Were they not talking to each other? Did they not know what to ask me? So even from the other side of the interview, the candidate is then, that's how you get the holistic assessment and make sure that the candidate is having a very smooth process and not having to retread ground. That's a waste of time for them and your team. So this simple thing, like I said, could be just an email that's sent out a day or two before the very first on-site when you know you've got a candidate going into that stage. If your ATS supports it, set up an automatic email. Like, make your life so easy as the recruiter and the hiring manager. Automate it. You can do it. We believe in you. So that is the main thing that I'll share with any team. And I give this tip away for free because it's so necessary that I want every single company to start adopting this. It's so important to the process and is skipped, I would say, 90 to 95% of the time when we have candidates going to on-sites.
Depending on the applicant tracking system you're using, like there is so much functionality which you can set up to automate a lot of this. And you talked
Yes.
about like the autoresponder when the interview is set up, there could be something that goes out to the individual and something that goes out to the hiring manager to just brief them. And okay,
Yes.
it might be 90% automated with a little bit of customization into the message according to whatever factors need customized. But
Yes.
I think that's a really, really great thing to do. And people need to understand more. Microsoft Word, typically we use like 0.1% of its capability. I think we
Yeah.
do the same with the applicant tracking system to an extent as
Yep.
well. Um,
100%.
last, I just quickly touch on the issue of bias. And what are some of the things that we need to be doing to try and minimize the potential for bias when hiring managers are doing interviews?
Yes. So I'm not going to touch on, bias that comes into diversity elements, right? We have so many programs already establishing how do we combat that bias. The bias that I tend to see is a little bit more insidious. It's not so upfront as, oh, this person's name, I don't like that name, or I don't like, the country they come from. It can be disguised as, for engineers, I don't like how they communicate. What does that mean? So last time when we interviewed, we were talking about how hiring managers need to define with recruiters, what does good look like? Good to me may be very different than what good looks like to you. So we need to set what that baseline is. And that is the information that needs to go out in these prep emails to get ahead of some of that bias, that assumption of what the candidate should look like or should come to the table with skills of. The hiring manager needs to dictate that. We're looking for a candidate who has X skills, who's going to help us build XYZ projects or do XYZ. They should have, this type of, even the energy, maybe you might want to say we're looking to add more of this value rather than we're looking to add a certain culture, a certain background. I've heard lots of teams say we need to hire a Black woman or we need to hire a person of color for this role. That's prescribing a skill or what someone should look like. Instead, let's say we need to lean on this value. We're missing this value of curiosity, of work hard, play hard, of, win big, whatever it is, however we want it to show up. That's how we start really getting around some of these biases and prescriptions of what a candidate should look like, where they should have come from. That's how we actually open up our assessment to look beyond the schools people attended or the logos they've managed to get a job at previously and really look at the impact that they've had in that role, which is the actual indicator for whether a candidate will be successful at the team or not.
Yeah, very interesting as always. Lauren, thank you very much for your time. Great to see
Thank
you, and
you.
I'll see you in a week's time.
The next one, can't wait. Thanks again, Adam.